Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we talk about the decentralized revolution. We talk about the world that's changing right before our very eyes. Of course, you see it, you feel it, you know it. You know that there's something going on. I like to say that the world we are going into is not the same as the one that we're leaving behind, and it's really a full court press, right? Like if we were playing basketball, right? From every side, we're just pressing it. And you can feel that pressure around us. And we look at it through the lens of politics, finance, and technology. And we have a lot to discuss. I have to admit, I've been out of the news cycle for a little bit. I had to turn it off, traveled outside the country for a little while, kind of had to let my mind breathe a little bit, get out of this news cycle, which was pretty nice. But boy, diving back in, it has been busy as always. And so we have a big show, a lot of things to discuss. A lot of things to go through. Some of the things I want to talk about in this show is more about Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX fiasco. We're going to talk more about that, but we're not going to keep beating the same dead horse. We're going to look at it because this story is developing. It's opening up and it's changing. It's developing in some ways that I thought it would, but it's also developing in some ways that I didn't expect, or maybe I did expect a little bit, but now we're seeing it. And of course, I think it was Emmanuel who said, never let a crisis go to waste. It seems to be the left's talking point these days, right? Try to use every crisis to their opportunity. Unfortunately, that's what it looks like is happening. So I want to show you that. I want to expose you to that. We're going to look at that. Look at some new bills that are coming across through the regulators' desks right now that will be impacting, not just the way that, these new technologies are being used today, but really this is massive because think about, we're witnessing a brand new technological revolution with a new technology that we have no idea the full potential of where this can go. And it's being stopped in its tracks by regulators, by lawmakers whose collective age is like over 70, who don't understand this new technology. Even the young kids don't understand it. And this will have lasting implications for generations to come. It's a really big deal. A lot to cover, so let's go ahead and dive into it. Of course, we start off talking about, as I said, Sam Bankman-Fried. He was the CEO of FTX, the second largest cryptocurrency exchange. Of course, I don't have to tell you the story. It blew up in spectacular fashion. Over $10 billion eviscerated almost overnight with it and disappeared. I've covered this story at depth. If you want to go back through my archives, of course you can. Just find me on YouTube. Just search Market Disruptors on YouTube. You can find the old videos there. You can find them podcast on any of your favorite podcast players. Just search Mark Moss Show on your podcast player. You'll find it there. But basically, we have the rise of this Sam Bankman-Fried and this FTX exchange. Over a course of 3 years, this mid-20-something guy created a $30 billion empire. He became the poster child for this new cryptocurrency space, but instead of championing the attributes and the virtues of cryptocurrencies, which would be freedom, mostly that's what I think about. I think about innovation, right? I think about innovation. And when I think about innovation in terms of being free to use our property in ways that we haven't been able to do before. Now, when I talk about property, I talk about that in a bigger sense than most of us think about, right? So property, in a sense, when Karl Marx wrote the book Communist Manifesto in the late 1800s, he talked about property as, physical property as a factory or a piece of equipment. And he said that there was two groups of people, the poor and the rich, proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and that the poor were always going to be oppressed by the rich, and that the poor had nothing to offer but their labor. And their labor would never equate to capital. So they never had any property because they had never had capital. And they never had capital because all they had was their labor. And that was just so wrong. Now, at the time, I could give him the benefit of the doubt for how he saw it like that. But of course, we know that now we have lots of things like intellectual capital. And as a matter of fact, intellectual capital is probably one of the greatest forms of capital that we have today. It's not just money, right? We know that you needed a lot of money to build a business in the past, to build a factory and get equipment and hire workers. But now we saw where you could write a line of code and instantly would be worth more than all of that capital. Today, we see good ideas aligned with audiences, and all of a sudden, that attention is worth more money. Like Kylie Jenner became a billionaire because the attention that she had was worth more than that capital. So we can see we have all these different forms of property, and so we have typically thought about that just as this money that we have, and again, back to Karl Marx, the poor didn't have any money. But now money as we know it has just changed, and cryptocurrencies are different ways to express that value. And so cryptocurrencies have become a way for, back to what I started, back to freedom. I have freedom to express my value, my wealth in other ways that weren't available to be done in the past. So we think about it like that. But what's interesting is as Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX, again, championed this ethos of freedom in cryptocurrency, he then basically used theft, fraud, lies, deceit, and then used those to get himself a lot of money, and then used that money to go influence politics and regulations to then clamp down on the very industry that gave him the wealth in the first place. When you look at it from a zoomed out perspective like that, it looks very suspect, because you would think that a new industry that gave somebody this freedom to go create all this wealth like he had would rather use that wealth to keep that freedom. Wouldn't you think? Like, if I created some new thing and I got ridiculously wealthy from it, and the government was going to try to make that thing illegal, I would use that money to fight the government regulators to keep what I'm doing legal. I wouldn't go to make it illegal. It doesn't make any sense. But nevertheless, that's what Sam Bankman-Fried was doing. So he created this, and of course, like I said, now this week we found that he has been charged. He's been charged with not just a crime, 8 counts. 8 counts of, interesting enough, conspiracy. You know, anytime somebody tells you, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist, conspiracies are real, and it's actually a crime, of which Sam Bankman-Fried was charged with, I think, 4 counts or 6 counts of actually conspiracy. Who would have thought? It's not just a theory, it's actually a crime. And that means that he's doing it with multiple people. And so he's been charged with actual crimes. And again, let's break this down a little bit. All right. So he became this poster child for the space. He was going to revolutionize the space. He was going to clean it up. He was going to allow the government regulators to get their hands around it and all of these things. Now, a couple things that have really broken out to me that really just continue to show us just how deep and how dirty this whole story is. Now, I've said before, as I started to uncover this, I did a video on my YouTube channel, which I broke down, which I called it I think I called it the government psyop. And if you want to see some of that, go watch that video on my main YouTube channel. Just search Mark Moss. But I basically showed a whole bunch of dots, and I just started connecting them. Now, I don't have all the facts to connect all these dots. But, you know, like I said, where there's smoke, there's fire. And, you know, one coincidence might just be a coincidence. But when there's 3, there's 4, there's 6, there's 8, is it still just a coincidence? And so we have to start looking at that. Now, some of the things that we were seeing is, like I said, he created this fraudulent enterprise, which had nothing to do with cryptocurrency, by the way, had nothing to do with new technology, had nothing to do with this new gray area of fast-moving new technology. It was just plain old fraud. Same way it's been done for hundreds or thousands of years. You pretend to be something that you're not. You lie to people about what you're doing. You take in their money. You continue to lie to them. You promise them things you can't give them. No different than anything that's been done in the past, okay? Same old, same old. But it's what he did with this, and it's the ties that it has in this. So a couple things I want to look at. Yeah, he got arrested. But what really have we learned since he's been arrested? But more importantly, what are these dots that we're tying together that look pretty bad? And so some of the things that we're seeing come together is the ways that the media is grasping onto stories and running with it. Now, you could say the same about me. I mean, I suppose everybody looks at a different angle and talks about it. But what parts of the story are they telling you, and more importantly, what are they omitting? And how are they angling it? So, one of the problems that we had in the past pre-internet days were, how do we get information? It was very difficult to get information. When I went to high school, we had to go to the library and get books. Right? Today, the problem isn't how do we get information. The problem is how do we parse through the information that we have, which is why you hear all over, misinformation and disinformation, and we need these information czars to tell us what's true. No, we don't. Look, we don't need any of that. What we need is just critical thinking. We need to learn to assess what information am I getting and think critically about it. So ask yourself a couple questions like, one, who's telling me this information? Start with that. What motivations do they have? What biases do they have? Start there. And then when you read the information, what of it is fact and what of it is opinion? Maybe start there. So for example, if I'm reading something from RT, then I would know, well, that's Russian information. So I would automatically assume that it's going to have some sort of Russian bias to it. Automatically assume that. And it's probably going to tell their side of the story more than it might tell somebody else's. All right. And then I can see what are the facts, right? If they give me a specific date and something like that. And what's opinion? If I read something from the Washington Post, well, that's a CIA mouthpiece. So I would know automatically that it's got a bias for some sort of U.S. intel, right? And they're trying to paint that picture. So we want to look at that. And when we look at what's going on, one of the big stories about FTX and these weird dots that we connected was that, interesting enough, and this is probably more coincidental than not, but FTX was founded right after Biden announced that he was going to run for office. Interesting. FTX was a fraudulent operation from day one. We know this now. The new CEO that's been put in place to handle the bankruptcy, John Ray, said that it's always been a fraudulent operation from day one. That's what he said. So we know it was set up as a fraudulent operation. It's been a fraudulent operation since day one. And it was set up the day that Biden announced he was running for office. We know that it was, and that might just be more coincidental than not, but it isn't. It is also coincidental that this fraudulent operation that generated $30 billion also became the second largest donor to the Biden administration behind George Soros, and donated more than $40 million to the Democratic Party in the midterms that just happened. Interesting. There's a lot of other things we'll dive into. Now, what's interesting about that is that all the information that we're getting out of the mainstream media today is saying, in one of the counts that he's actually being charged with, is campaign finance fraud. So he's financed these campaigns fraudulently. But all the news coming out of the mainstream media is that he gave to bipartisan candidates. But that's not the facts. It's not the facts. It's not the facts at all. Now, there is some truth to that, but it's not the fact. So what we can see, if we want to break down Sam Bankman-Fried's political donations, we can see that it's mostly to Democrats. And when I say mostly, I mean like 99% mostly. So what we do know is that Sam Bankman-Fried said that he had given, publicly, said that he had given $40 million to Democratic parties. But then what happened is he went back and said, well, we also gave some to some Republicans, but, we didn't want to say that because if we said that, then people wouldn't like us. And so we gave it through these dark markets. We gave it secretly, which is illegal. So now he says this, which now there's charges filed on him for doing this illegal act. Why he would admit to that publicly is beyond me. But now it looks like he gave illegally to Republicans. Kind of weird. So all the money he gave to the Democrats, that was okay, no problem. I mean, he stole all the money. It was a criminal enterprise from day one, and he gave all that money to Democrats. That's okay, but he might have given some of this money to Republicans, and that's a problem. Well, if we add it up, of course, what we know about, I did the math for you here. What we can see is that of the $40 million. Most of the money went to super PACs, right? So they put the money into one big organization, and then they spread it around. There were 62 named candidates that were outside of these super PACs. All right. Of the 62 named, 9 of them were Republicans. There were 9. When you break down who these 9 Republicans are, they all happen to be people that he was trying to sway. So they were all people that were sitting on some sort of a position that would enable or disable him in getting what he wanted in forms of regulations. So it wasn't that he was just giving to Republicans because he likes Republicans and he wanted to push Republican values. It was because these individual Republicans were influential in what he was trying to get through. So there was 9 out of the 62. All right. But what we know is that you're only allowed to give up to $2,900, $2,900 to one candidate in one cycle, or 2 cycles could be $5,800. So I haven't gone through all the math here, but let's just take the high amount of $5,800. So of the $5,800 that he could give max, we know it wasn't all that, but let's just say it was $5,800 max times the 9 Republicans would equal $52,000. So $52,000 was the maximum amount that he gave out of $40 million. But of course, all across mainstream media, it was bipartisan. And the reason why I'm bringing this up isn't because I care. I don't care about bipartisan. I don't care about left or right. That's all a game to distract us, where they're trying to turn the left versus the right, the red versus the blue, to distract us from we the people versus the government. That's the real battle here. But what they're trying to do is say, hey, look, we were using this illicit activity, and we were using this illicit activity and this money to fund ourselves. But now what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, it was actually illegal giving it to the Republicans. We're going to cause this whole mess over here in mainstream media. So you won't see that we took 39.9 million of it, 39.99 million of it. So I just want you to see that. I want you to see the facts here. So never let a crisis go to waste. And so you've probably heard of like a false flag, right? Let's create this event that maybe isn't as real as we make it to believe, make people believe it is. And then we'll use the attention or the outrage of that event to then push some sort of new policy or plan. So here we have this fraudulent company that was created the exact same time as the Biden administration announced they were going to move into power. They proceeded to donate over $40 million. And now the media is trying to say, and one of the charges he's being brought up on is campaign finance. So he donated money illegally to some Republicans, potentially, and it might be about $50,000 out of the $40 million that he gave. So watch for that. Again, critical thinking. I'm trying to give you some of the facts. So as you start to hear these headlines, you start to hear these narratives, you can start to see through that. I mean, right off the bat, $27 million was given to Protect Our Future Pact, which of course was controlled by his brother. So out of the $40 million, $27 million was given to another PAC that his brother runs. $10 million was given to a candidate, Carrick Flynn, a Democrat from Oregon, who lost. $10 million was given to just one candidate. $2 million was given to another one, Rep. Lucy McBath, Democrat from Georgia. So, of course, Georgia and Oregon were battlegrounds. And not surprisingly, a lot of that money was spent in those battlegrounds. Also, Texas, $1 million was given to Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke. $1 million, another $1.4 million given to Rep. Jasmine Crockett, a Democrat from Texas, and $1.1 million for a Democrat in Michigan, Adam Holler. Of course, Michigan's another big battleground state. I'm not going to go through and read them all here, but you get the idea. But what is happening because of this? Let's dig in a little bit deeper into that. So, again, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that's exactly what we're looking at here. Now, Sam Bankman-Fried, as I said kind of in the intro, is that he had fraudulently created all this money. So, one, he created something out of thin air, this FTT token. He manipulated the market. fraud again, manipulated the market to make it think it had value and it didn't. And then he had this fake thing that he created out of thin air that he tricked everybody into thinking had value, manipulated into thinking had value. And then he went and borrowed against it. And then he stole customer funds and did all these things. And then he took all this money and went and started to try to influence all these regulators. As I said earlier, the only money that he gave to Republicans was to Republican lawmakers who were making the laws on the things he wanted them to make laws on. He was trying to influence them. So what was he doing with this? Well, he was trying to get them to pass laws. And some of the laws that he was trying to get them to pass, now it looks like they may pass. But now it looks like lawmakers are stuck in this like, well, shoot, do we go ahead with these laws that he wanted us, that he helped us draw up and that he wanted, but then it looks like we're using laws of a known scammer, or do we abandon them and push them through and scrap them and start all over? It's kind of an interesting predicament they find themselves in. But yet here we are. It looks like a couple of these might find its way in. One of them here is called the Crypto Consumer Protection Bill. Sam Bankman-Fried backed it before the whole collapse. And they want to know, lawmakers are trying to consider if this would help them prevent another implosion of exchanges. What I've found time and time again, what would actually help prevent these things isn't new laws. It's enforcing the laws that were already there. So it turns out he broke a whole bunch of laws. Turns out he's facing 8 counts. It turns out the 8 counts that he's facing, even if he only gets found guilty on half of them, would still probably result in maybe 2 life sentences. I mean, Bernie Madoff got 150 years. He's probably facing at least that. So turns out what he did was already illegal. Turns out what he did was so illegal, he's probably going to face multiple life sentences. So turns out we don't need new laws to protect consumers because what he did was already illegal. Think about that for a second. It's insane. You know, when you hear about these gun situations where, you know, the shooting happened in Texas and they want to pass all these new gun laws. Well, turns out that he already got through a whole bunch of gun laws and he already went through all these checks. So it turns out if we would have just enforced the laws that were already there, it would have probably, or could have maybe helped prevent that. New laws don't need to be passed. And same that we have here. What's the point of passing new laws when the old laws were already there and they didn't work? I mean, it's just insane. Some crypto advocates say it doesn't go far enough to protect certain kinds of exchanges, but we'll see. This bill, the Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act, was introduced in August, but it hasn't been used yet. But it gives the Commodities Future Trading Commission, the CFTC, more authority to regulate digital commodities like FTX. The bill arrived before FTX's collapse, ignited fresh debate over how to protect consumers in a relatively young and untamed crypto industry. It's among a handful of solutions lawmakers will consider as they begin to probe the implosion of FTX with high-stakes hearings this week. Now, let me just say something real quick. FTX was able to, well, one, they hired a bunch of people from the CFTC. So there's two main regulatory bodies in the United States, the SEC and the CFTC. They hired a bunch of people from the CFTC, and they gave a bunch of money to the other people at the CFTC, buy them off. Now, as we've come to find out from the new CEO, John Ray, who's gone there to clean things up, he says, and by the way, he worked on the Enron case, and he said this is the worst he's ever seen. He said it's never been worse. There's no way anybody could have ever done any due diligence on this at all. Like, they had one bank account. They ran a $30 billion company, and they used QuickBooks. They approved invoices using Slack with emojis. So, like, if the invoice was good to be paid, they'd send like a smiley face emoji in Slack. Like, no joke. That's the worst case it's ever been. They didn't even have a bank account. FTX money, when you would wire money to FTX, it actually went to Alameda because FTX didn't even have a bank account. Okay? Like, they didn't have a bank account. They had nothing. And yet somehow FTX was able to get the only crypto derivative license from the CFTC. They bought it. It's called Ledger. How were they able to get the only one? No other exchange, no bank, no one could get it, but FTX got it from the CFTC when they didn't even have a bank account? When they didn't have any compliance? Was there any due diligence, like at all? And I'm just telling you that because now supposedly the CFTC wants to be the one to regulate this. They were the ones that gave out the derivatives license. How good of a job did they do before? I mean, you're really trying to ask the fox to guard the hen house here. Like literally. They literally are the ones that just closed their eyes and issued the license and gave it to FTX with no due diligence. And now they want to argue that they should be the ones that regulate this. I mean, it's insanity. These agencies should be shut down in disgrace, in my opinion. We don't need new laws. We already have laws. I mean, so instead of charging them with 8 counts, you charge them with 10 counts if you had more laws. Anyway, so let's talk about this DCCPA bill that, again, Sam Bankman-Fried was helping to push. So it says that the bill would require entities to seek that want to become digital commodity platforms to register with the CFTC as commodities brokers. Okay, good. So now you have to register with us. Okay, that's great. The bill would also establish core principles that platforms must abide by, including providing records of transactions. Okay, so they should keep records. Now we know FTX didn't have good records, so maybe that would be something. The commission would then be the rulemaking authority on these types of agencies. Okay, it says the bill wouldn't have solved any of these problems, though. It said if FTX had been registered in the United States, the company maybe because the FTX company was actually headquartered in the Bahamas. But it says, quote, many of the actions that have been allegedly perpetrated actually have been crimes in this country for over a century, end quote. Yeah, that's exactly my point. All this stuff was already illegal. We don't need new laws for this. It says here that, as I said, Sam Bankman-Fried attempted to shape this piece of legislation in a way that would have been detrimental to decentralized finance. And actually, the bill favors exchanges such as, of course, his FTX. Neil said that the bill Bankman-Fried lobbied for would, quote, would have built a moat around his now-defunct exchange, FTX. And, of course, like I said, he was paying off the CFTC in order to do that. We can see here it says that Stabenow and committee ranking members Senator John Boozman from Arkansas both received $23,000 in campaign contributions from individuals at FTX. Booker received $5,700 from individuals at FTX as well. So, yeah, we have laws. It's ridiculous. But of course, what are lawmakers? What do? They make laws. So if they're going to do something, then they got to make laws. That's what they do. But let's look at another one because, like I said, never let a crisis go to waste. And this is what is, in my opinion, the bigger motive here. So the bigger motive is good old Elizabeth Warren sitting in the background. Of course, she's going to come out and try and do whatever she can. And so Senator Elizabeth Warren, never letting a crisis go to waste, she wants to come out and, of course, save the world. And what she wants to do is she wants to pass a new bill in what's called a crypto money laundering bill. Now, the crypto money laundering bill has nothing to do with what just happened here, but she's going to use the momentum of this attack, potentially a false flag attack. And I hate to say that. Look, man, I was just over the last couple of days, I've been watching these. I was watching this two different documentaries I watched. One was a Rome. It was kind of somewhat reenacted and somewhat told. It was pretty cool. It was on Netflix, and it was all about the Roman Empire. And it was specifically around like the last emperor, Marcus Aurelius. And then I was watching this other one, How to Become a Tyrant, and that was pretty cool as well. But what was interesting about both of them is you see that whether you go all the way back to the Roman Empire or you go back to the times of like the early 1900s, man, people are just corrupt. People are corrupt. Governments are corrupt. It's just the way it is, right? But I believe it's gotten worse. It's gotten way, way worse. And we're seeing it happen more and more. And so, that is what's happening here. We can see here Elizabeth Warren, she's just waiting for something like this to happen. And we always knew that anybody that anybody that's opposed or thinks cryptocurrencies are a fad or won't last, probably their number one argument would be that, well, the government would have never allow a competing type of money out there, right? The central bankers will never allow anything to compete with them. Look at Muammar Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein when he tried to go against the dollar system. What happened to them, right? And so everybody knew there would be this battle, and of course there will be. And here it comes, good old Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts. They've introduced a bill to crack down on money laundering, because money laundering is bad, and financing of terrorists, because, yes, financing of terrorists is bad, using cryptocurrencies. Now, why does it have to be using cryptocurrencies? Again, we already have laws against financing terrorists. Do we need to make one for cryptocurrencies now? And they're calling it the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act, which sounds great, like the Save the Puppies Act. And it would bring know your customer rules to crypto participants such as wallet providers and miners, and prohibit financial institutions from transacting with digital asset mixers, which are tools designed to obfuscate the origin of funds. And so basically what they're saying is that what they want in this new Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act is every single person in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, whether you're a miner, so you run a high-powered computer that just helps process transactions, or you wrote a piece of code that's now being used to route something, or you have a server somewhere on Amazon Web Services that routes traffic, or wherever it is going to have to capture or make sure that every transaction has a KYC or Know Your Customer attached, including the biggest revolution of Bitcoin is that I can custody my own Bitcoin, which means I can hold it, I can have my own wallet. And if I want to send it to you, you can have your own wallet, and there's nobody in the middle that can stop it, block it, or prevent it. It's great. It's revolutionary. It's amazing. Not for the government. The government doesn't want that, and so they want to have this Know Your Customer piece put into every single piece of that. So every single participant, the wallet provider, the miners, they would want them to have to capture that information, which is impossible. It's not possible. There's no way to build that in, which is exactly their point. If they can enforce some sort of a rule that's not possible, then that means you can't even engage in any of that operation, because there's no way to engage in that operation and comply with the rule at the same time. You see how that works? So basically what they're saying is this whole segment of the market, this whole new technology, you just can't even do it because you can't comply with what we want. Because this brand new groundbreaking revolutionary technology can't be used in this way that this 75-year-old person has made up in their mind, you just can't use it. I'm just highlighting the insanity of this. The insanity of this. This act would allow the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the FinCEN, to implement a proposed rule requiring institutions to report certain transactions involving unhosted wallets. An unhosted wallet would be where the user has complete control over the contents. Concerns over the use of crypto to facilitate money laundering and terrorist financing are frequently aired by lawmakers or regulators and are often used to highlight the need for more robust regulation of the digital asset industry. Of course. So if you can only give us control over everything you can do, if you can only give us every single shred of privacy that you have, if you can just, live in a cage forever, then we can promise you safety. See how that works? It's always for your safety. Because terrorism is bad. I don't want terrorism. I don't want my shopping center to get blown up, and neither do you. So we'll all just go along with that. But you see how this FTX thing is now being used to push this piece of legislation that had nothing to do with it. The more you know. Anyway, you're listening to The Mark Moss Show. That's what I got for you today. Thanks for listening.